Robert Hager is a retired NBC News aviation correspondent and NBC News contributor, and Seth Kaplan is a managing partner at Airline Weekly. So, Bob, let me start with you. I mean, we talked in the last segment about the possibility of evidence being compromised for the issues we just raised in the intro. How serious of a concern is that to you right now?
Now, I think that is a serious concern. You know, it may not be as much of a concern as it would be in some domestic airline accident here, where the wreckage is supremely important and what's on the black box is supremely important. In this case, where everybody's pretty certain it was a missile shoot down, the physical confirmation of that by examining the wreckage is important, but it's not as paramountly important as, say, spy satellite pictures, infrared images of the missile being launched, those kinds of things. Similarly with the black boxes. You want the black boxes, you want them certainly before the rebels get them and take them gosh knows where. But what's on the black boxes may not be crucial. In the case of the Soviet shoot down of the Korean airliner back in 1983 that you were talking about, that tape went on for only a minute and 45 seconds after it had been hit by a missile, and it really didn't have much importance to say about what went on. So it is a factor, the fact that the investigators can't get in there, but it's not the end of the game.
Well, the Washington Post today reported on some of the problems that international investigators are facing in eastern Ukraine. Quote, the monitors were given access to the site for 75 minutes and are negotiating on a day-to-day basis for time at the site. Spokesman for the investigators described on CNN what they saw today.
We saw a lot of debris. The debris doesn't look like it's been manipulated in any way, but there's lots of it. The crash area is very, very big, but we were only given a very small area to actually monitor. And we were greeted almost with hostility. So it wasn't a visit that was done under the best conditions, and we hope to continue again tomorrow.
U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Samantha Power tweeted her annoyance today, quote, seeing reports OSCE monitors investigating MH17 were harassed by separatists. Russia must use influence to ensure unimpeded investigation. Well, so, Seth, let me ask you about that. You know, Bob talks about maybe the limited utility here of the black boxes. We always, when there's a plane crash, think the black box is going to be sort of the Rosetta Stone. It's going to answer everything. In the last segment, too, as well, Tom Costello was basically telling us, take the public statements that are being made. Behind the public statements are incredible intelligence that's already, in his mind, allowed the U.S. potentially to pinpoint exactly where this thing was fired from. Does it even matter who controls the evidence that's on the ground at this point, or is that overridden by sort of the intelligence gathering that we have right now?
Yeah, no question. To a degree, this is not really an airline story. It's a national security story, no question. As Bob said and as Tom said earlier, certainly you want to get those black boxes. Bob just mentioned with the Korean airliner more than 3 decades ago, those black boxes that in the end did continue recording for a little while after the incident, although they weren't all that useful. In that case, by the way, the Soviet Union at the time held on to them for years, didn't release them, and in the end they weren't all that helpful. In this case, they may or may not be. It's possible that they stopped recording exactly when the incident happened, and that the pilots were totally unaware of anything until the incident. But it would be useful, for example, to know, did these pilots have any concern about where they were flying? No evidence of that, or, for example, did they have any kind of unusual communication? It would be useful to know that, although certainly no indication yet that happened.
I wonder, too, Seth, just in terms of when you start connecting the tragedy of this, just the humanitarian tragedy of this with, governments now looking for official responses and the sort of, what the, long-term sort of geopolitical effect of it could be. If those black boxes are recovered and what's on them is just sort of, the harrowing final, moments of life for people, I imagine from almost I hate to say it, but almost like a public relations perspective, that becomes a powerful tool for people trying to organize some kind of official response to this.
It does, and that's exactly what happened with that Korean airline, or Korean Airlines Flight 7. When those recordings finally came out, first transcripts and then the recordings, you got this sense of what had happened in these moments where the pilots knew that things were unlikely to turn out well for them, as indeed they didn't. So yes, an emotional angle there certainly. And by the way, in terms of who's to blame. blame. I mean, there's little doubt that first and foremost, whoever shot the missile is to blame. But there are these questions about should this aircraft have been flying where it was, and it would be useful to know if, in fact, there was any kind of chatter in the cockpit about that as well. Just in terms of, is the airline, although certainly not primarily at fault, at least partly to blame for flying in a place where at least some airlines were avoiding.
I think that's a question a lot of people are asking. So Bob, just on that issue, though, of Flight 007, the Korean Air flight 30 years ago, you say there's an interesting bit of history there about the search for the black box there, sort of illustrating the international tensions that spill into these things.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, the Soviets knew very well if they had the black box and the run-up to the incident that you wouldn't hear the Korean airline pilots talking about being off course, that in fact they had mistakenly, innocently wandered off course, and here the Soviets shot them down in cold blood. So there was this terrible race to find the black boxes. It's out there in the ocean, not far from the farthest easternmost reaches of the Soviet Union. The Soviets are trying to get there first. They had 19 boats out there looking for it. The U.S. is out there with boats, the South Koreans, the Japanese, and the Soviets even put fake pingers in the water to try to mislead the U.S. investigators to looking in the wrong place. Finally, the Soviets did find the black box, and they spirited those suckers off to Moscow in a big hurry, and the Western world didn't find out what was on those black boxes until 10 years later when the breakup of the Soviet Union occurred and the boxes were turned over to the West.
Wow, and there are shades of that in the stories that we're getting right now from the scene of that accident.
Yeah.
Thank you to Bob Hager, Seth Kaplan. Appreciate it.